The letter trembled in Olivia Morrison's hands as the stagecoach rattled over the rocky Montana terrain. Each word of Matthew Xavier's correspondence burned into her memory after reading it 100 times during the journey from Philadelphia. She had not been entirely truthful in her responses to his advertisements, and the weight of that deception pressed against her chest like a stone, making each breath a conscious effort as the wilderness stretched endlessly outside the dusty window. The year was 1878, and Olivia had fled eastward civilization not out of romantic notions but desperate necessity. At 23 years old, she had watched her father's printing business crumble after his death, leaving her and her mother with debts that swallowed everything they owned. Her mother had gone to live with Olivia's married sister in Boston, but there was no room for Olivia in that tiny apartment already bursting with 3 small children. The mail-order bride advertisements had seemed like providence, a way to start fresh where no one knew about the scandal of her father's failed business or the whispers that followed her family through Philadelphia's streets. Matthew Xavier's letters had painted a picture of a hard-working rancher with land stretching across the Montana Territory near Granite, a mining town that had sprung up with the discovery of silver in the surrounding mountains. He wrote of needing a partner to help build a life, someone who could manage a household and perhaps one day raise children in the clean mountain air, far from the crowded cities of the East. His words had been practical but kind, never flowery or excessive, which Olivia had appreciated. She had responded with equal practicality, describing her skills in reading, writing, arithmetic, and household management. What she had not mentioned was her complete lack of cooking ability. Her mother had always handled the kitchen while Olivia worked alongside her father in the print shop, setting type and managing accounts. She had implied domestic competence without outright lying, but the sin of omission felt just as heavy now as the stagecoach lurched over another rut in the road. "Granite, 5 minutes," the driver called from above, and Olivia's stomach clenched with nauseating force. She pressed a hand against the green traveling dress she had remade from one of her mother's old gowns, checking that every button was secure, every pleat in place. Her dark blonde hair was swept back in a simple bun, and she had pinched her cheeks for color before realizing how foolish that was. Matthew Xavier had not chosen her for beauty but for partnership, and she needed to remember that. The town of Granite materialized from the dusty landscape like a mirage, buildings of raw lumber and stone climbing up the hillside, where mines burrowed into the mountains. The main street bustled with activity despite the late afternoon hour, miners mixing with ranch hands, merchants, and the occasional well-dressed gentleman who likely owned claims in the surrounding hills. The stagecoach pulled to a stop outside a building marked as the express office, and Olivia's heart hammered so hard she thought everyone within a mile must hear it. She descended carefully, grateful when the driver helped her down and retrieved her 2 modest trunks from the back. They contained everything she owned in the world now: clothing remade and mended, her father's copy of Shakespeare's complete works, her mother's pearl earrings, and a few other treasures too precious to sell when the creditors had come calling. "Miss Morrison." The voice was deep and warm, like honey poured over gravel, and Olivia turned to find herself looking up into the most honest face she had ever seen. Matthew Xavier stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that spoke of hard physical labor and sun-weathered skin that marked him as a man who spent his life outdoors. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and slightly too long, curling at his collar in a way that suggested he could not be bothered with frequent trips to the barber. But it was his eyes that caught her, a clear gray that reminded her of dawn breaking over winter landscapes, direct and assessing but not unkind. "Mr. Xavier," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Thank you for meeting me. Matthew, please." He removed his hat, holding it against his chest in a gesture that seemed more natural than practiced. "I hope the journey was not too difficult. It is a long way from Philadelphia." "The journey was manageable, thank you." Olivia smoothed her skirts, aware that she must look travel-worn and dusty despite her attempts at tidiness. "I appreciate your letters preparing me for the distance. Let me get your trunks loaded onto the wagon. The ranch is about an hour's ride from town." Matthew moved with easy efficiency, lifting her trunks as though they weighed nothing. She noticed his hands were calloused and scarred, the hands of a man who worked with animals and tools, building things with his own strength. The wagon was sturdy and practical, pulled by two solid draft horses that regarded Olivia with mild curiosity as Matthew helped her onto the bench seat. He swung up beside her with fluid grace, gathering the reins with competent hands. "I thought we might stop by Reverend Miller's house on the way out of town," Matthew said carefully, not looking at her as he clicked to the horses. "If you are still willing, we could speak our vows this evening. But if you would prefer to wait, to get to know the ranch first, I have made arrangements for you to stay with the widow Thompson in town for as long as you need." The fact that he offered this choice, that he was not demanding immediate marriage despite their agreement, made Olivia's throat tight with emotion she had not expected. "This evening would be fine," she said quietly. "We made an agreement, and I intend to honor it." Matthew glanced at her then, those gray eyes searching her face for something she could not name. "An agreement built on letters and hope," he said. "If you find the reality does not match your expectations, I would rather know now than have you feel trapped. I could say the same to you." The words came out before Olivia could stop them, her fear breaking through the careful composure she had maintained. "You know very little about me, really. I might be a terrible disappointment." "I doubt that very much." Matthew's voice was firm, certain in a way that made her want to believe him. "But let me be clear about something, Olivia. I asked for a partner, not a servant. I need someone who can stand beside me and help build something worth leaving to the next generation. I do not expect perfection. I just expect honesty and effort. Can you give me that?" The knot in Olivia's chest loosened slightly, though guilt still gnawed at her. "Yes," she said, "I can give you that." Reverend Miller's house was a modest structure near the church, and his wife welcomed them with genuine warmth, bustling to make tea while the Reverend fetched his Bible. The ceremony was simple, with Mrs. Miller and the Reverend's adult son serving as witnesses. Olivia spoke her vows in a steady voice, meaning every word even as her hands trembled. Matthew's hands were steady and warm when he took hers, his voice deep and solemn as he promised to cherish and protect her all the days of his life. When he kissed her, it was brief and respectful, his lips warm and dry against hers. Olivia felt the strange reality of being married to this man she had met less than 2 hours ago. This stranger who was now her husband, the person to whom her entire future was now bound. The ride to the ranch passed in conversation that came easier than Olivia had expected. Matthew talked about the land, explaining how he had homesteaded the property 5 years ago, building from nothing to a working cattle ranch that now ran 200 head. He spoke of his plans to expand, to breed better stock, to build a legacy. His passion for the work was evident in every word, and Olivia found herself drawn into his vision, imagining what such a place could become. "I was married before," Matthew said as they turned off the main road onto a track that wound through grassland toward distant mountains. "Sarah was her name. She died 3 years ago, pneumonia that came on sudden in the winter. We had no children." He paused, his jaw working as though the words were difficult. "I want you to know I am not looking for someone to replace her. You are your own person, and I respect that." "Thank you for telling me," Olivia said softly. "My father died a year ago. I understand something of loss. Then perhaps we both understand that life keeps moving forward and we must move with it or be left behind." Matthew's voice was thoughtful rather than callous. "I believe in making the most of what we are given, in building something good from whatever foundation we have." The ranch house appeared as they crested a small rise, and Olivia's breath caught despite herself. It was larger than she had expected, a solid two-story structure of logs and stone with a wide porch that wrapped around three sides. Outbuildings dotted the property. A barn, a bunkhouse, corrals, and several smaller structures whose purposes she could not immediately identify. Everything was well maintained and purposeful, speaking of a man who took pride in his work. "I built most of it myself," Matthew said, and she heard pride in his voice. "Had help with the barn raising, but the house I did over 2 winters. It is solid and warm, good for raising a family if God blesses us that way." 2 men emerged from the barn as the wagon approached, and Matthew raised a hand in greeting. "My hired hands," he explained. "Tom Carson has been with me 3 years, and young Billy Reed joined us this spring. Good men, both. They bunk in the cabin by the barn." Tom was perhaps 40, grizzled and bow-legged in the way of men who spent their lives on horseback. Billy looked barely 18, tall and gangly with a shock of red hair and a face full of freckles. Both removed their hats politely as Matthew introduced his new wife, offering congratulations that seemed genuine if somewhat awkward. "Supper will be ready in about an hour," Tom said. "Got a stew going and fresh biscuits." "Tom is the best cook in Montana Territory," Matthew told Olivia with a grin. "He keeps us all fed and complaining about our good fortune." Olivia felt a wave of relief so strong it made her dizzy. If Tom did the cooking, perhaps she could learn from him before Matthew discovered her inadequacy in the kitchen. It was a temporary reprieve, but she grasped it gratefully. Matthew carried her trunks upstairs to a bedroom that overlooked the front of the property, with windows that let in the golden light of the setting sun. The room was simply furnished but comfortable. A large bed with a wedding ring quilt, a wardrobe, a washstand with a porcelain basin and pitcher, and a small desk by the window. Everything was spotlessly clean, and Olivia realized Matthew must have prepared it for her arrival. "I will give you time to freshen up and settle in," Matthew said, setting her trunks at the foot of the bed. "There is water in the pitcher and clean towels. Come down when you are ready. No rush." He left, closing the door softly behind him, and Olivia sank onto the bed, her legs suddenly unable to support her. She was married. She was in Montana Territory. She was a rancher's wife now, expected to fulfill duties she had only vaguely considered in her desperation to escape Philadelphia. But as she looked around the room at the care Matthew had taken in preparing it, at the view of mountains turning purple in the evening light, Olivia felt something unexpected. Hope. Perhaps this could work. Perhaps here, in this wild country, she could build a new life and become someone worthy of the trust Matthew Xavier had placed in her. She washed quickly, changing from her traveling dress into a simpler blue cotton gown, and repinned her hair. When she descended the stairs, following the sound of voices and the smell of cooking food, she found the kitchen warm and welcoming. It was large and well-equipped, with a massive iron stove, a long work table, and shelves lined with supplies. Matthew stood by the stove talking with Tom, and both men turned as she entered. "Come in, Mrs. Xavier," Tom said warmly. "Everything is ready. Billy already ate and headed back to watch the cattle. Just us for supper tonight." The meal was simple but delicious, the beef stew rich and savory, the biscuits light and buttery. Olivia ate gratefully, realizing she had barely touched food all day in her nervousness. Tom kept up a steady stream of conversation, telling stories about the ranch and the territory that made Matthew laugh and helped Olivia relax. After supper, Tom excused himself to his cabin, and Matthew led Olivia back to the front room, a comfortable space with a stone fireplace and furniture that showed signs of careful construction. He lit a lamp against the gathering darkness and gestured for her to sit. "I want to make something clear," Matthew said, settling into the chair across from her rather than beside her on the settee. "I know this is all very sudden and strange. We are married, but we are still strangers in many ways. I do not expect you to share my bed until you are ready and willing. The room upstairs is yours. I have been sleeping in the small room down the hall, and I will continue to do so until you decide otherwise." Olivia stared at him, surprised by this unexpected consideration. Most men would have considered it their right to claim their bride immediately, regardless of her feelings. "That is very kind of you," she managed. "It is not kindness, it is respect." Matthew leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gray eyes serious. "I want a real marriage, Olivia, not just a legal arrangement. That means building trust between us, learning each other. I will not rush that, no matter what anyone might think is proper. What do you want from me?" The question came out small, almost frightened, and Olivia hated the weakness in her voice. "What are your expectations?" "I expect you to tell me when something is wrong rather than letting it fester. I expect you to learn about the ranch and how we do things here, to become part of making it work. I expect you to be honest with me, even when that is difficult." Matthew's voice was steady and calm. "In return, I promise to provide for you, to protect you, to listen when you speak, and to try my damnedest to be a good husband. Is that fair?" "More than fair," Olivia whispered. "Matthew, I need to tell you something." He waited, patient, and Olivia forced herself to meet his eyes as she confessed. "I am not a good cook. In fact, I barely know how to cook at all. My mother handled the kitchen while I worked with my father in his printing business. I let you believe I was domestically accomplished, and that was wrong of me. I am sorry." She braced herself for anger, for disappointment, for the recriminations she felt she deserved. Instead, Matthew began to laugh, a deep, genuine sound that transformed his serious face into something warmer and younger. "That is what has you looking so terrified." He shook his head, still chuckling. "Olivia, Tom does most of the cooking around here anyway. He is better at it than I ever was, and he enjoys it. I need you for far more important things than making biscuits. You can read and write and do figures, yes. Yes, quite well. Then you are exactly what I need. I am terrible with the books, with keeping track of expenses and inventory. I need someone who can manage that side of the operation, who can handle correspondence with buyers and help me make smart decisions about investments. If you can do that, I will count myself blessed beyond measure." The relief was so overwhelming that Olivia felt tears prick her eyes. "I can do that," she said firmly. "I am very good with accounts and records. That was my job at my father's business. Then we are perfectly matched." Matthew stood and held out his hand. "Come, let me show you the office, such as it is. You might have ideas for organizing it better." The office was a small room off the main living area, with a desk piled with papers, ledgers stacked haphazardly on shelves, and receipts stuffed into various boxes. Olivia felt her fingers itch to organize it all, to create order from the chaos. "I keep meaning to sort through it," Matthew admitted sheepishly. "But I hate paperwork. I would much rather be working with the horses or fixing fence." "Let me handle this," Olivia said, already moving to the desk, examining the ledgers. "I will have this organized within a week and can give you a complete accounting of where the ranch stands financially. Take whatever time you need." Matthew's voice was warm with approval. "This is exactly what I hoped for when I wrote those letters. Someone who could be a true partner, complementing what I do rather than just duplicating it." That night, alone in the large bedroom, Olivia lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Montana night. Coyotes called in the distance, and the wind whispered through the eaves of the house. She thought about the man sleeping down the hall, this stranger who was now her husband, who had shown her more understanding and respect in one evening than she had dared to hope for. Perhaps she had not made such a terrible mistake after all. Perhaps this desperate gamble would turn into something real and good. The thought let her finally relax into sleep, exhaustion claiming her as the moon rose over the mountains. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Olivia rose early, helping to prepare breakfast alongside Tom, learning from him as they worked. He was a patient teacher, showing her simple dishes first and never making her feel foolish for her lack of knowledge. Matthew spent his days working the ranch, often gone from dawn until dusk, but he always made time to eat supper with Olivia and to spend the evening talking with her. They talked about everything: his plans for the ranch, her memories of Philadelphia, their childhoods, their hopes for the future. Olivia learned that Matthew had grown up in Kansas, the son of farmers who had lost everything to drought and locusts. He had come west at 18, working as a cowhand for various outfits before saving enough to file his own homestead claim. Every inch of his ranch represented years of backbreaking work, and his pride in what he had built was justified. Olivia threw herself into organizing the office, and what she found both impressed and concerned her. Matthew's instincts for breeding and managing cattle were excellent, and his herd was valuable. But he had been undercharging for his beef, and his record-keeping was so disorganized that he had no clear picture of his actual profits. She spent hours reconstructing his finances, creating systems for tracking expenses and income, and researching market prices from newspapers that arrived sporadically from Helena and other larger towns. "You are paying 30% less than market rate for your cattle," she announced one evening, spreading her carefully prepared reports across the kitchen table. "And you are spending money on feed supplements that provide minimal benefit while neglecting investments that would actually improve your herd quality." Matthew studied her figures with growing amazement. "How did you determine all this? Research and mathematics?" Olivia felt a flush of pride at his evident respect. "I found price reports from the last 2 years in that pile of newspapers in the office, and I calculated averages adjusted for seasonal variation. Your cattle are high quality, Matthew. You should be getting top dollar for them." "I never wanted to seem like I was taking advantage," he admitted. "The buyers from Helena were always friendly, and their prices seemed fair." "Friendly and fair are not the same as honest," Olivia said firmly. "They have been underpaying you significantly, banking on your good nature and poor records. We need to negotiate better terms or find new buyers." "We," Matthew repeated softly, and when Olivia looked up, she found him watching her with an expression that made her heart skip. "I like the sound of that." Over the following weeks, they became true partners. Olivia handled all correspondence, negotiating with buyers with a combination of courtesy and steely determination that earned grudging respect even from men who initially dismissed her as just a rancher's wife. Matthew's next cattle sale brought in nearly 40% more than the previous year, despite selling roughly the same number of animals. But beyond the practical partnership, something deeper was growing between them. Olivia found herself watching for Matthew's return each evening, her heart lifting at the sound of his footsteps on the porch. She noticed small details about him. The way he was gentle with the horses, speaking to them in a low, soothing voice. The way he always removed his hat when speaking to her, a mark of respect he offered unconsciously. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he truly smiled. Matthew, for his part, seemed increasingly reluctant to leave her side when he was home. He found excuses to linger over breakfast, to check on her progress in the office, to sit close beside her on the settee in the evening. His hands would brush hers when passing dishes at dinner, and those brief touches began to feel charged with electricity. 2 months after her arrival, on a warm September evening, they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. Matthew had been quieter than usual during supper, and Olivia sensed he was working up to saying something important. "Olivia," he began, then stopped, seeming to wrestle with his words. "These past weeks, getting to know you, working alongside you, it has been better than I ever imagined when I placed that advertisement. You are smart and capable and funny, and I find myself thinking about you constantly when we are apart." Olivia's heart hammered against her ribs as she turned to face him fully. The setting sun illuminated his face, highlighting the strong lines of his jaw and the vulnerability in his eyes. "I am falling in love with you," Matthew said simply. "Maybe I have already fallen. I know we married out of practical necessity, but I find I want more than partnership. I want a real marriage in every sense. I want to wake up beside you and fall asleep holding you. I want to build a life and a family with you, not just a ranch. But only if you want that too. I will not pressure you or make demands. I just needed you to know what is in my heart." Olivia felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "I was so afraid," she whispered. "Afraid I would disappoint you, that you would regret bringing me here. But Matthew, you have been everything I never dared to hope for. You are kind and patient and so much stronger than you realize. I think I started falling in love with you that first day when you offered me a choice instead of making demands." Matthew reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his calloused hands. "May I kiss you properly?" he asked. "Not as a formality, but as your husband who loves you." "Yes," Olivia breathed, and then his lips were on hers, warm and gentle but with an undercurrent of passion that made her entire body come alive. She kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, and when they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Come to bed with me," Matthew said, his voice rough with emotion. "Be my wife in truth." "Yes," Olivia said again, and let him lead her inside and up the stairs. That night marked a new beginning. Matthew was gentle and patient, mindful that this was all new to Olivia, taking time to learn what pleased her, and to show her the depths of passion that could exist between husband and wife. Afterward, lying in his arms in the large bed, Olivia felt a completeness she had never experienced before, as though a piece of herself she had not known was missing had finally clicked into place. The seasons turned, and autumn gave way to the harsh Montana winter. Snow piled deep around the ranch, and the work became harder, focused on keeping the cattle fed and protecting them from the worst of the weather. Olivia learned to handle the cold, to dress in layers, to appreciate the warmth of the house Matthew had built. She also learned she was pregnant, her monthly courses stopping and morning sickness beginning just as winter truly set in. Matthew's joy at the news was overwhelming, his care for her becoming almost comically overprotective. Tom teased him mercilessly about hovering while Olivia laughed and assured her husband she was not made of glass. The winter seemed endless, but it gave Olivia time to prepare. She sewed baby clothes from fabric ordered from the general store in Granite, her stitches becoming more confident with practice. Matthew built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it until the surface was silk smooth, carving a simple design of horses along the sides. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Olivia knitting or sewing while Matthew read aloud from her father's copy of Shakespeare, stumbling sometimes over the language but persisting with determination. "I want our children to have education," he said one night, setting the book aside. "Not just practical skills, but real learning, books and ideas and understanding of the wider world. I never had that growing up, and I have always felt the lack." "We will make sure they have it," Olivia promised. "And Matthew, you are far more educated than you give yourself credit for. You understand animal husbandry and land management and business. That is education, even if it did not come from books. You always know how to make me feel better about myself," Matthew said, pulling her close against his side. "That is a rare gift." Spring arrived with dramatic suddenness, the snow melting in rushing torrents and new grass carpeting the range. The cattle, lean from the winter, began to fatten again. Matthew and the hands worked from dawn until dark with spring branding and other necessary tasks, but he always made time to check on Olivia, who grew rounder with their child. In early May, on a morning when the world smelled of wet earth and new growth, Olivia's labor began. Matthew rode to town like a madman to fetch Dr. Harrison, a practical Scotsman who had seen more births than he could count. Tom's wife Martha, whom Olivia had befriended during winter visits to town, came to help as well, her calm competence a blessing as the contractions grew stronger. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the day and into the evening. Matthew wore a path in the floorboards downstairs, refusing to leave the house even when Tom suggested he might be more useful checking the cattle. When the baby's first cry finally rang through the house, Matthew took the stairs 3 at a time, bursting into the bedroom with wild eyes. "A boy," Dr. Harrison announced with satisfaction. "Big and healthy with a good strong cry. Your wife did remarkably well for a first birth." Olivia lay exhausted against the pillows, her hair damp with sweat, but her smile was radiant as she held the squalling infant. "Come meet your son," she said to Matthew, who approached almost reverently. The baby boy had a shock of dark hair like his father and lungs that testified to his vigor. Matthew touched the tiny hand with one finger, and immediately the infant gripped it with surprising strength. The look on Matthew's face, of absolute wonder and fierce protective love, made Olivia's heart overflow. "What should we name him?" she asked. "I always liked the name Thomas," Matthew said. "After Tom, who has been such a good friend. Thomas Michael Xavier, if that suits you." "It suits perfectly," Olivia agreed, watching as Matthew carefully took his son into his arms, cradling the baby against his broad chest with surprising gentleness. The christening happened 3 weeks later, with half the county seeming to show up at the small church in Granite. Olivia had not realized how many friends Matthew had, how respected he was in the community. Ranchers and miners, merchants and their wives, all came to congratulate the Xaviers and to get a look at young Thomas, who behaved with reasonable good humor throughout the ceremony. At the celebration afterward, held at the ranch with tables set up in the yard and food contributed by seemingly everyone, Olivia found herself surrounded by women eager to offer advice and friendship. She had been so focused on her partnership with Matthew and her work on the ranch that she had not taken time to build friendships in the community. Now she realized what she had been missing, and she resolved to change that. "You have done well for yourself," Martha said, settling onto the porch beside Olivia while Matthew showed off Thomas to a group of admiring ranchers. Matthew Xavier is one of the best men in the territory, and everyone can see how happy you have made him. He was so lost after Sarah died. I worried he would just close himself off forever. He never makes me feel like a replacement, Olivia said softly. He makes me feel valued for who I am. That is because you are not a replacement. You are your own person, and you have brought different gifts to his life. Martha patted Olivia's hand. Sarah was sweet and gentle, but she never had a head for business. You compliment Matthew in ways she could not, just as she did in ways you do not. That is not better or worse, just different. The insight was comforting, easing a worry Olivia had not fully acknowledged even to herself. She had never tried to compete with a memory, but it was good to know she did not need to. As summer progressed, Olivia found her rhythm managing both the household and her bookkeeping duties while caring for Thomas. It was exhausting but deeply satisfying. The baby thrived, growing plumper and more alert with each passing week. Matthew was a devoted father, insisting on taking his turn with night feedings, walking the floor with Thomas when the baby was fussy, talking to his son constantly as though the infant could understand every word. "You are going to spoil him," Olivia said one evening, watching Matthew play with Thomas on the settee, making silly faces that had the baby gurgling with laughter. "Good," Matthew said unrepentantly. "A child should know he is loved beyond measure. That is not spoiling, that is security." In August, a crisis tested everything they had built. A group of rustlers, emboldened by light law enforcement in the territory, began hitting ranches in the area, running off cattle in the night. Matthew and the other ranchers organized patrols, but the rustlers were clever and elusive. The night they came to the Xavier Ranch, Olivia was alone in the house with Thomas. Matthew and the hands were riding patrol on the far section of the property. She woke to the sound of cattle lowing in distress and men's voices shouting. Fear clutched her heart, but she forced herself to think clearly. She had Thomas in his cradle beside the bed. First priority was protecting her son. She lifted him carefully, swaddling him tightly to keep him quiet, and carried him to the cellar access in the kitchen pantry. It was cool and dark down there, lined with shelves of preserves and stored vegetables. She settled Thomas in a corner, praying he would stay asleep, and climbed back up. Matthew kept a rifle above the fireplace, and Olivia retrieved it with trembling hands. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was young, though she had not touched a gun in years. She checked that it was loaded and positioned herself by the window where she could see the barn and corrals. 3 men were driving cattle out of the main corral, working quickly in the moonlight. A 4th stood watch, and as Olivia watched, he turned toward the house. She saw him gesture to one of the others, saw them start walking toward the porch. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the rifle steady, but Olivia forced herself to breathe slowly. She would not let these men threaten her family. When the door handle began to turn, she called out clearly, "I am armed and I will shoot anyone who enters this house." The door pushed open anyway, and Olivia fired, aiming high, the bullet splintering the door frame. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space, and she heard cursing from outside, the sound of running feet. She quickly ejected the spent shell and chambered another round, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Get out of here before my husband returns," she called. "He and his hands are armed and riding patrol. You have minutes at most." There was a long moment of tense silence, and then she heard the sounds of men mounting horses, the rapid thunder of hooves moving away. Olivia stayed at her post, the rifle still raised, until she heard different horses approaching, these coming from the direction of the far pasture. "Olivia," Matthew's voice was frantic with fear. "Olivia, are you all right?" She set the rifle down with trembling hands and opened the door, and then Matthew was there, crushing her against his chest, his heart pounding against her cheek. "I heard the shot. I thought—" He could not seem to finish the sentence, his hands running over her as though checking for injuries. "I am fine. Thomas is fine. They tried to come into the house and I fired a warning shot. They ran." Olivia was shaking now, the aftermath of fear catching up with her. "You are the bravest woman I have ever known," Matthew said fiercely. "Come, let me check the house." Thomas was awake in the cellar, whimpering softly, and Olivia scooped him up, holding him close as she climbed back to the kitchen. Tom and Billy were examining the damage to the door while Matthew checked every room, every window, ensuring the house was secure. The rustlers had gotten away with about 20 head of cattle, a loss, but not a catastrophic one. The other ranchers had been hit harder, and over the following days, Matthew worked with the territorial marshal to track the gang. They were caught a week later trying to sell stolen cattle in Helena, and justice was swift and certain in the territory. But the incident had changed something in Olivia. She had always felt like a guest in Montana, someone playing at being a rancher's wife. Now she understood in her bones that this was her home, her land, her life to defend. She belonged here, not because Matthew had brought her here, but because she had chosen it and fought for it. The second winter was easier than the first, perhaps because Olivia now knew what to expect. Thomas grew into an active toddler, fascinated by everything, especially the animals. Matthew built him a small wooden horse on rockers, and the boy would spend hours rocking back and forth, babbling in his own language. In March, Olivia discovered she was pregnant again, and this time the knowledge brought only joy, no anxiety. She knew now that she could manage pregnancy and childbirth and motherhood alongside her other responsibilities. Matthew's reaction was identical to the first time. Overwhelming joy mixed with protective hovering that made her laugh. This birth was easier than Thomas's had been, perhaps because her body knew what to expect. In late October, as autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, she delivered a healthy baby girl. They named her Sarah Grace, honoring Matthew's first wife in a way that felt right and proper, acknowledging the past while building the future. Tom's wife, Martha, who had become Olivia's closest friend, held little Sarah while Olivia recovered. "She looks like you," Martha observed. "Same blonde hair and delicate features. Thomas favors Matthew, but this one is definitely her mother's daughter." "I hope she has her father's strength," Olivia said softly. "Matthew is the strongest person I know in all the ways that matter." "She will have the best of both of you," Martha predicted, and time would prove her right. The years flowed past like water, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Thomas grew tall and sturdy, shadowing his father around the ranch, learning to ride and rope and handle cattle. Sarah was more bookish, preferring to help Olivia with accounts and correspondence, showing early signs of a sharp mathematical mind. 2 more children followed. Another boy they named William, and finally another girl named Elizabeth after Olivia's mother, who had died peacefully in Boston, never having made the journey west to meet her grandchildren. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Matthew's instincts for cattle breeding and range management, combined with Olivia's financial acumen and business skills, made them formidable. They purchased adjoining land, expanding their holdings. They built a larger barn and improved their breeding stock. They weathered droughts and hard winters, market fluctuations and political changes as Montana moved from territory to statehood in 1889. Through it all, the love between Matthew and Olivia only deepened. They learned each other completely, the way only people who have lived through hardship and joy together can know one another. They learned when to talk, and when silence was better, when to push, and when to let be, when to stand together, and when to give each other space. On their 15th anniversary, Matthew took Olivia into town for a rare dinner at the hotel dining room, with Martha and Tom watching the children. Over roasted chicken and chocolate cake, Matthew pulled a small wrapped package from his pocket. "I am not much for fancy words," he said, suddenly shy despite 15 years of marriage, "but I wanted you to have something that shows what you mean to me." Olivia unwrapped the package carefully to find a locket on a delicate gold chain. Inside were tiny photographs, one of Matthew holding baby Thomas, the other of Olivia with Sarah in her arms. The craftsmanship was exquisite and the gift clearly expensive. "Matthew, it is beautiful," she breathed, tears pricking her eyes. "But we agreed not to spend money on luxuries." "This is not a luxury. It is a necessity." Matthew's voice was firm. "I need you to carry us with you always, to remember what we have built. Olivia, you took a terrified gamble when you answered my advertisement. You left everything you knew and traveled into the unknown. You could have found a man who did not appreciate you, who would have wasted your talents or broken your spirit. Instead, by the grace of God, you found me, and I found you." "I was so afraid I would disappoint you," Olivia admitted, the old fear surfacing even after all these years. "That first day, riding to the ranch, I was certain you would regret your choice. Not for a single moment." Matthew reached across the table to take her hands. "You exceeded every hope I had. You gave me partnership and love and a family. You made this ranch into something I could never have built alone. You made me into a better man than I was. How could I possibly regret that?" "I love you," Olivia said simply. "I loved you when you were just words on paper offering me hope. I loved you when you gave me a choice instead of making demands. I love you more with every year we spend together. You are my home, Matthew Xavier, more than any house or land could ever be." They held hands across the table, the years and experiences written on their faces, but the love between them as fresh as the day he first confessed his feelings on the porch watching the sunset. As they left the hotel, walking under stars that blazed impossibly bright in the Montana darkness, Matthew pulled Olivia close against his side. "Have I told you lately that you are extraordinary?" "Not in the last hour," Olivia teased. "I was beginning to think you had forgotten." "Never," Matthew promised. "I will remind you every day for the rest of our lives." The children grew and eventually began to leave the nest. Thomas took over more responsibility for the ranch, proving as capable as his father. At 22, he married a schoolteacher from Granite, a smart young woman who reminded Olivia of herself at that age, educated and determined to make something of her life. They built a house on the eastern section of the ranch land, and soon Thomas and his wife were expecting their own child, making Matthew and Olivia grandparents. Sarah attended university in Helena, one of the first women to do so, studying mathematics and business. She returned with a degree and immediately began modernizing the ranch's operations, introducing new accounting methods and marketing strategies. At 25, she married a lawyer from Helena, but they lived in Granite, so Sarah could continue working with the family business. She never bore children of her own, claiming the ranch was her baby, and no one pushed her. William became a veterinarian, studying in the East before returning to practice in Montana, treating animals across several counties. His expertise proved invaluable to the ranch and to their neighbors. He married late, at 31, to a widow with 2 young children whom he adopted as his own, giving them the Xavier name and all the love of a natural father. Elizabeth, the baby, surprised everyone by having the strongest wanderlust. She traveled east, married a newspaperman, and ended up in San Francisco reporting on city politics and social issues. Her articles sometimes made their way back to Montana, and Olivia and Matthew read them with pride mixed with longing for their faraway daughter. But despite the children's various paths, they all came home regularly, drawn back to the ranch and the family that had nurtured them. The house that Matthew built with his own hands rang with the laughter of grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren, each generation adding their own chapter to the Xavier legacy. One evening in late summer, 40 years after Olivia's arrival in Montana, she and Matthew sat together on the porch they had sat on countless times before. Both were silver-haired now, their faces lined with age and experience, but their hands still fit together perfectly. "You ever regret it?" Matthew asked, his voice softer with age but still strong. "Leaving Philadelphia, coming to this wild country, marrying a stranger, not once," Olivia said firmly. "That scared girl on the stagecoach could never have imagined all of this. The love, the family, the life we built together. You gave me everything, Matthew. A home, a purpose, children, partnership, and love beyond measure. How could I possibly regret the best decision I ever made?" "I was so worried that first day," Matthew admitted. "You seemed so refined, so educated. I thought maybe you would find ranch life too rough, too isolated. I thought maybe I had made a mistake bringing an Eastern lady to Montana." "You did not bring an Eastern lady. You brought a woman looking for a new beginning, for a place to belong, for someone to build something with. And I found all that and more. I found home. I found love. I found myself." Olivia leaned her head against Matthew's shoulder, fitting into the curve of his body as naturally as breathing. "You exceeded all my hopes, Matthew Xavier, every single one." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in the same shades of orange and purple they had watched together for 40 years. The ranch spread out before them, solid and prosperous, a testament to their partnership. In the distance, they could hear Thomas directing work in one of the far pastures, Sarah's voice calling to her husband, the laughter of grandchildren playing in the yard. "We built something good," Matthew said finally. "Something worth having, worth fighting for, worth passing on." "We did," Olivia agreed. "Together." The word hung in the air between them, encompassing everything: the work, the love, the life, the legacy. Together they had taken two broken pieces, a widowed rancher and a desperate woman fleeing scandal, and forged something whole and beautiful. Together they had weathered storms and celebrated triumphs. Together they had raised children and built an empire. Together they had loved and been loved in return. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Matthew tightened his arm around Olivia's shoulders. "Thank you," he said softly. "For answering my advertisement, for taking a chance, for making my life infinitely richer than it would have been without you." "Thank you for being exactly who you are," Olivia replied. "For your kindness, your strength, your patience, your love, for seeing me as a partner rather than just a wife, for building this life with me." They remained on the porch long after darkness fell, two people who had started as strangers and become halves of a whole, watching the stars wheel overhead and listening to the sounds of the home they had created together. In the morning there would be work to do, grandchildren to spoil, cattle to manage, accounts to balance. But in that moment they simply existed together, content in the knowledge that they had found exactly what they were looking for in each other. The ranch would continue long after they were gone, passed down through generations of Xaviers who would carry forward the values Matthew and Olivia had instilled: hard work, integrity, partnership, and above all, love. The land would endure, and so would their story, told and retold around family dinners, a testament to what could be built when two people committed to facing life together. Years later, when Matthew passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 83, Olivia held his hand and whispered her gratitude for every moment they had shared. She followed him 3 years later, surrounded by children and grandchildren, her last words a smile and a whispered, "I am coming, my love." They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a massive pine tree that provided shade in summer and stood sentinel in winter. Their gravestones were simple but bore inscriptions that told their story. Matthew Xavier, 1845–1928, beloved husband, father, and partner. He built a legacy of love. Olivia Morrison Xavier, 1855–1931, beloved wife, mother, and partner. She exceeded all hopes. The ranch continued to thrive under the management of their descendants, each generation adding their own innovations while honoring the foundation Matthew and Olivia had laid. The story of the mail-order bride who feared disappointing her new husband and the understanding cowboy who exceeded all her hopes became family legend, told to each new generation as an example of what love and partnership could achieve. On summer evenings, when the work was done, and the family gathered on the porch of the house Matthew built, they would look out over the land and remember the two people who had started it all. They remembered the courage it took for Olivia to leave everything she knew, the wisdom Matthew showed in valuing partnership over domination, and the deep love that had sustained them through 47 years of marriage. The land would change over the decades and centuries, as all things do. But the legacy of Matthew and Olivia Xavier endured, a testament to the transformative power of love built on mutual respect, honest partnership, and the courage to take chances on each other. They had found each other across the distance, two broken pieces that fit together perfectly, and they had built something beautiful that would last long after they were gone. In the end, that was the greatest success of all, not the land or the cattle or the money, but the love they had cultivated and the family they had raised, spreading out across Montana and beyond, each one carrying a piece of Matthew and Olivia's legacy forward into the future. They had taken a desperate gamble and turned it into a love story for the ages, proving that sometimes the best things in life come from the bravest decisions, and that true partnership can overcome any obstacle when two people commit to facing life together with honest hearts and helping hands.